enable me to screen share, please? And Jason, I'm an artist and I live in London, and I've worked with Michael for a number of years on his books as a proofreader and doing some editing. And so I'm really grateful to be here this year, because I don't know that I'll have another opportunity. Hopefully next time you guys will all be in person. So, so this is really nice for me. Let's see. Okay. So, sorry. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, because I think the point isn't necessarily to know what all of these slides are, but to just talk about my experience and you know, art and healing and transformation. So I'd mentioned before that I was a portrait artist and a painter, and then in 2011, my younger sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so at that time, she was then also diagnosed with breast cancer gene mutation, BRCA1. Many people have heard of it, I think by now, especially Angelina Jolie carries one mutation, and so it's quite in the popular knowledge. But so I also tested positive while I was home taking care of her, and then came back to London and came back to my art practice and really didn't know what to do with myself. The recommendations if you test positive for this mutation are to remove your breasts and your ovaries and your fallopian tubes while they're still healthy, before there's a chance for cancer to develop. And so I knew I wanted to do that. And I also knew from the very beginning that I wanted to do something creative around it, or with it, or through it, but I didn't know what that meant. So this image, I will say, is the BRCA1 gene that we all carry. And this one includes my specific mutation, where there's a missing letter A or code, and then sort of the rest of my DNA is jumbled up, nonsensical and unreadable. So I don't have that gene producing a protein that stops mutations from happening. But so I immediately reached out to a photographer I had met, and I thought, I can't do this on my own. How do you paint your way through this, you know? I was used to observing the outside world, but I wasn't really used to reaching within and drawing on my own experience and expressing that in that way. It was, you know, years of studying, you know, careful measurements and color theory and all of that. And that was, for me, quite meditative, but it wasn't expressive of an internal experience. So this photographer and I started to meet and talk and exchange resources, and I got permission for her to attend my hospital appointments. And eventually she also photographed a surgery, attended a surgery. So we developed this relationship over the years with my surgeons. And eventually she came into the studio as well, photographed objects that I had, and we started doing experimental photographs with my body, with, you know, cutting up cactuses and pinning them together, and just trying to get at other ways to show some of the, you know, some of what's happening in between the appointments, outside of the normal sort of experience that you would associate with the more medicalized version of what was happening to me. And then she also asked me to start responding to some of her photographs. So she gave me a number of images that she chose, and I found my way to stitching onto them and stitching into them. And that stitching was this really visceral thing, you know, this piercing of the paper, and in a way it could be quite violent, but also felt quite creative. And spending time with the images, although it wasn't intended to be therapeutic or healing, it became quite therapeutic, because I was reclaiming some of these moments that were really difficult in my medical process. You know, these moments that we hand over our agency and our control to these doctors when we're in their offices. This was a photograph of me immediately before, not immediately, but in the week before my surgery. They had to take before pictures of my breasts to compare them to the altered breasts post-surgery. This is an image of my surgeon's hands immediately after my breast surgery. And, you know, I just kind of, again, it was this violent thing, but it also felt quite creative to me. And there's something sort of that became beautiful in it, in engaging the image. And then working with hospital documents, family photos, you know, doing research and tracing my family history, all of these things started coming together. And so this image on the letter here is my diagnosis letter, informing of me of my mutation. And then bringing in other things. So I have a series of these negatives of the night sky, PET scans from my sister's diagnosis and treatment with cancer, and started playing with these things and bringing them into really a book-like form and thinking about how this all could fit together to tell a story. And I'm not going to read this, but bringing also into this was the writing that I'd been doing all along the way. So creative writing that was, collecting definitions, personal diary entries, more abstract kind of thoughts about risk and health, fate. I did have a text to read, but I'm afraid we're short on time. I don't want to take too much time, so I might skip it. And then if we have time, I'll come back and read it. But then also thinking about, at some point I started thinking about the audience and how could they engage this, and it wasn't really about me telling my story or about me finding healing. It was more about tapping into the universal aspects of our experience, and that was really important to me. So then I wanted to create an installation that allowed people access into this experience, but did so in a really private way that was safe. I really started to think about other viewers' feelings and trigger points, and not wanting to trigger things for them. And I became quite protective of the viewer. And so I made these peepholes in this six-sided body, and I filled the inside of this body with objects. And so these are just images of sort of not what the viewer would see, but you might see as I'm installing the work inside. And then they would have these really guided viewpoints. So of through a lens that showed a hospital surgery, or an object sitting in front of them, another magnifying lens, or a tube that shoots all the way across the other side of this body, and has these images of the night sky. And then surrounding it all, I'll just back up, with there was a speaker tucked into the side that had birdsong, and I wanted to envelop this space with something healing and something holding, so that it wasn't traumatic. I didn't want to create trauma for people, but I wanted to share, a really challenging experience. I think that might be the last, of the slides. And sorry to go so quickly. I just know we're short on time, but it was just to share a sense of, I suppose, how, for me, the healing and the transformation, all of these things came through this process almost inadvertently. It wasn't intended in that way. But it's also difficult, and it keeps me in it. And that's one of the difficulties now is, I am putting together a book, and I've always got this one foot in that experience. And now it's been several years since it's happened. And it's not an easy place to be, but I know that it's an important place to be, and that on the other side, there will be more sort of healing and change and transformation and opportunities for goodness to come out of it. So it's sort of a sacrifice, I guess, not a sacrifice, but just a challenge that I think I need to be making now in order to come through it onto the other side. Sorry, I feel like I just spoke really quickly, but I'm just kind of pouring through that.
I mentioned this earlier, but I had the opportunity, the great honor and privilege of reading Jill's book, or at least a draft. I'm sure there's been drafts since then, but it was so moving, so profound. And I would like, if you don't mind, just take a moment and go back and read to us that. She's such a fantastic artist, but she's such a great writer too. So if you would, just please share that with us. And thank you so much. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago about the wound being the place where the light enters us, our vulnerability being that place where we connect. There's nothing more vulnerable than what you're sharing. There's nothing more that could connect us and cause us to share our humanity than you being as open and vulnerable as you are. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Oh, now I've lost my 1 second. Maybe I'll just read it, actually. If you guys don't need to see it, or would you rather see it while I read it?
Either way is fine. Absolutely.
Okay.
Whatever works.
Okay. Choice is not amorphous. Like the human cell, choice has an anatomy. It is made up of many parts. Here, my body, my broken DNA is the nucleus at its center. But this choice is also made up of particles of experience and chains of story, of emotional ties in the language of life, of memory and longings and opportunities for regret, and of hope. Transformation takes place in the space in between, long waiting periods between doctor appointments, private recoveries from surgery, and the internal space we retreat to as we revisit conversations with friends, families, and strangers. Physical transformation is from the outside in, but emotional and mental transformations start with the ripples of a stone dropped in water, which create a wave that rides and grows until it engulfs you. It can happen suddenly, a violent wave pushing you into a new space, or so quietly that you're surprised when you become aware that you're wet.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone want to respond or go next?
I wanted to say this about Jill's work. I think you probably don't think of it as brave, but I think it's brave to just expose most personal detail. I think artists have to do that actually. They have to dare to just expose everything and be raw and bare and naked. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate that Heather does, and I know Jason. When you played Solieri in Amadeus, I saw that on stage, and you hit it because you were in touch with that piece, and you took it in and worked it and knew it frontwards, backwards, and sideways. So that's what artists do. Well, I think all art is healing and transformative, and I wouldn't even set out to write anything if it wasn't healing and transformative for me. And then you hope it is for the reader as well, or the viewer. So yeah, and the reader or viewer doesn't need to know if there's some autobiographical component to it. Sometimes it's invisible, but you know, as the artist, you know it's there. And so those tendons are always tugging and pulling, and sometimes a little raw, but they have to be there for it to be, I think, really meaningful art. And I celebrate that. So I'll just leave it at that.
Hearing Jill speak reminds me of one of my favorite things that happens at the college is when my colleagues in visual art bring in a guest artist and they do a talk about their piece. There's something so beneficial to hear someone else talk about their work in a field that has nothing to do with yours. That, I mean, it does, but somehow I get more out of hearing Heather talk or Jill speak or Arnold or Lynn talk. Sorry, I just saw your name there. I know who you are. I'm just reading it under you.
My parents gave me that name. What can I do? You know?
You're Lynn to me, man. You're Lynn to me.
I'm Lynn to me too.
Okay. You can change that, by the way. We can change that.
I know, but it's too much trouble.
I know. It makes me want to, somehow I get more out of hearing people talk about the stuff that's not my stuff, but it's related to my stuff. Because when it's my stuff, I almost know too much about it that I get into the weird critical, like, director head or something. Like tonight, I'm going to go see a play at Mosley High School, and I'm so excited that Bruce and the kids are finally getting to do it. But there's a certain part of me that won't be able to divorce the director or producer brain. But when I go hear an opera or even the country music singer I heard last night at Boots and Bling, there's just something about somebody sitting up there with a stool and a guitar, and I don't care what the genre is. That's magical to me. Then the troubadour tradition and he was a consummate entertainer, regardless of whether that was my chosen genre. So So just thank you to Jill and for sharing that. And it just makes me want to, I wrote your stuff down. It makes me want to go do a deep dive into your work and the stuff that you've been doing in the same way that I've been able to do with some folks that I know better. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both.
Hey, let me just, since you just mentioned that, Jason, if everyone, I feel like most of you already know this, but for those of you who don't, Heather and Jill and everyone, if there's a place where your work can be found online, or, you know, if you can just share that with us, where we can see more of what you do, please let us, before we end today, let us know.
I would really love that. As I'm not an artist, I'm a viewer, and I can just say, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being so brave and so vulnerable. And when I experience your work, I feel that, and I feel that healing for myself, and I feel that courage, and I feel that courage in myself. So thank you so much.
We would probably be nowhere without people who are interested and love the arts. And I'll tell you what, a good consumer of the art, that's an art.
Yes.
To consume art is itself an art. And I appreciate the yearning people have for art, because that's a necessity, without which there would be none of us or any reason for our putting things out there.
You know,
Michael.
I was just going to say that exact same thing, that the way Vanessa not just consumes art, but criticizes it in the best sense of that word, interacts with it, both in the classroom and then in, you know, virtual conversations. There's nobody better to have seen a film with and discuss it, you know, or look at a work of art. And that is an art itself. You're exactly right.
Michael, back in about 96, I think it was, I had two professors from Florida Atlantic University come to Gulf Coast. You may remember that.
Florida International University.
Yeah, Florida International University. James Hall and Les Standiford. And James Hall read a poem called, it was about Spider-Man with a speech impediment. It was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And it was called Maybe That's Your Problem Too. And I said, if only I could write a poem like that. And I tried and tried and tried and tried. And finally, I think I got close. So I wanted to read that to you, but it's based on the toys that have been inducted into the Smithsonian. And I think there's 4 of them: the hula hoop, the slinky, Barbie, and Mr. Potato Head. Maybe there's a 5th now, I don't know. But I heard that on NPR, and I said, you know, there's probably a poem in that. And you never know where our art's going to come from. That's the thing. It can come from the strangest places. And so I just want to read this to you, because I'm a little bit proud of it, but I don't think it's as good as James Hall's, but I'm going to read it to you. It's called Mr. Potato Head. Mr. Potato Head addresses Barbie at the Smithsonian. Look, Barbie, you're never going to see, there's my dog. Look, Barbie, you're never going to see Ken again. He of the tennis shorts and pastel sweater tied around his neck. So how about getting real with me? Let's explore, as they say, each other, parts and all. Take this hula hoop, lay it flat, and it'll be our home. Very mod, very circular. When we lie within it, our bodies will be on the face of a compass, eye tilting you towards true north. And this slinky will be our mortal coil, or preferred contraceptive device, should we choose to delay the little ones that will no doubt look like more like me. Come, Barbie, come to Spuds. It is I, Mr. Potato Head. Make a life with me. Oh, there you go. That's probably my most positive
So good.
poem I've ever written. Everything else is dark.
Well, Lynn, we were all muted, but I was watching. There was lots of laughter happening because I was watching the faces. And as someone who's unfortunately done a couple Zoom comedy shows, we should have unmuted before you read that.
Well, the dogs were enough, so it's okay. Thank you.
Excellent. We have 4 minutes and 50 seconds left, so fill it up, folks.
Heather and I put our websites in the chat. Is probably the easiest way to connect with what we're doing.
It's a great idea.
I do find it an interesting topic, being the creator and having that heal and transform you versus viewer, reader, audience, consumer, and whatever that is. And, and I guess I don't know, what that is for someone who doesn't create and only consumes, even though that is still a creative act in itself, because, you're bringing so much to that. And as much as I have definitely healed and transformed through other works and been influenced so much by that, for me personally, I've healed and transformed so much through my own work, over the years. I know that during the lunch thing I shared about when I went to my that little cabin up in the woods and, brought myself out of my depression then, and that was a very exaggerated example of that. But, over the years, I've grown to know myself through my art and been able to be raw and honest with myself and worked through so many issues through my art that I don't know, how I would have done that otherwise. And I shudder to think the kind of person that I personally would have turned into or stayed or something, had I not had this just amazing magical way of healing, of learning, of all of that, and it's so much deeper. People say art is so expressive, and I feel like that's such a shallow expression of it. It's not just I have feelings and I want the world to know, it's so much more than that. I don't know, but yeah, so I find that interesting, the both sides of that, creator and consumer, although I don't like the word consumer in that context. Someone come up with a better word.
I was going to say that it's interesting to me that in everything I have ever created, it is at least in part a response to someone else's work. And everything we do is inspired by other work, the work of others. It is informed. And so often when we first start, we're emulating, we're trying to sound like, who we first fell in love with or look like, paint like them or whatever. But even as we find our own voice, we're still just influenced by this cloud of witnesses that have gone before us and have, and then sometimes it's a direct response. Double Exposure was a direct response to Marriott and Ecstasy and the experience I had with that book. And you could read them and think there's no way these are not connected in any way, but one inspired the other, We have just a few, probably 30, 40 seconds left. Anybody want to say anything else after I say thank you all so much?
Thank you all so much. I was going to just relate to Heather that we lost 44 trees and I grieved those trees. And so your work where you spoke to me on this emotional level, and everyone's work speaks to me on that emotional level and different experiences that I have or I know that my family have had. It's beyond words. And that's what that means to me, all of your work. So thank you.
Jill's website is in the chat as well, but if you need to contact anybody, please feel free to contact me and I'll pass that along. Anyone else?
Thank you, Michael, for putting this together. Thank you, everybody. It's so great to see everybody and talk to everybody and hear amazing stories and perspectives and all of it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Take care, you guys.
Thank you. I
Take
love
care.
you all. Appreciate you. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Talk
Bye.
soon.